Hi guys, welcome to the Econ episode 3 of our series breaking down Econ-Jargon. As we had last week, I have Sanaa with us today to talk us through our last session on game theory. We've covered game theory quite extensively on this channel. We had a session on the prisoner's dilemma. We had a session last week where we covered things like the Nash equilibrium, where we looked at strategies and payoffs. So we thought we'll devote one final session to cover everything else about game theory. It's going to be a bit of a fun session today, a fun short session, because we'll have things like the chicken game and the battle of the sexes being discussed later on. But before I yield the platform to Sanaa, who I thank again for curating 2 brilliant slides for you guys today, two slides that you can directly engage with. So thank you, Sanaa, for that. So I'll start off with what a coordination game is, right? It's an important branch of game theory because a coordination game is a type of simultaneous game found in game theory where it describes a situation where a player will earn a higher payoff when he selects the same course of action as another player. So that's where the word coordinates comes in, because you're trying to make your strategy be in line with the strategy of another player without knowing what the other player would opt to do, because it's a simultaneous game. So you're trying to match your strategies and coordinate with the other player in a way that will enable you to gain higher payoffs through having the same action or same strategy on both ends. And to break this down for us even more, when we look at the types of games under coordination games, I yield the floor to Sanaa to take it on from here.
Hi guys, so thanks for watching the third live session, and I'm going to be talking about the types of games. So there's basically 4 different kinds: the cooperative versus non-cooperative games, symmetric versus asymmetric, simultaneous versus sequential, and normal form versus extensive form games. So I'm just going to give out the definitions in short for you to understand what the difference is between all of them. And then we will discuss the 2 games, Battle of the Sexes and Chicken Game. So cooperative games are basically where players are convinced to adopt a particular strategy through negotiations and agreements between the 2 parties. And an example of this would be the prisoner's dilemma, which we discussed last week and the week before. In prisoner's dilemma, what we have to understand about corporate games is that, for example, let's say there's John and Mac, and they've been able to contact each other, and they have both decided to stay silent regarding a particular problem. Now, in this negotiation, they would have had, so this communication and cooperation between them beforehand has helped them decide on a strategy accordingly. On the other hand, a non-cooperative game is where a game in which players decide on their own how to maximize their profit. So the best example of a non-cooperative game is also a prisoner's dilemma, where both players decide to not cooperate with each other and end up having a worse payoff than when they would actually cooperate. And an example that we discussed from last time was between Apple and Samsung. So if Apple and Samsung decide to reduce their prices due to COVID-19, so it's not necessary that they cooperated with each other beforehand to reduce their prices, but it was just because of the situation of the ongoing pandemic that they both decided, without any contact between both of them, that they would reduce the prices so that people would be able to afford their products. Moving on to symmetric and asymmetric games. So in symmetric games, the strategies are adopted by all players, and all the strategies in the players are the same. The symmetry can exist in short-term games only, because if it becomes a long-term game, then the number of options for each player increases. And the decisions in a symmetric game depend on the strategies used, not on the players of the game. So even if the players change, the strategy remains the same. On the other hand, in asymmetric games are the ones in which strategies adopted by players are different. So an example of this would be a new organization entering a market, because different organizations adopt different strategies in a market. Third one would be simultaneous games and sequential games. So simultaneous games are the ones in which the move of the 2 players is simultaneous. So they both decide together simultaneously what course of action they would take and what move they would make. And in sequential game, it's basically turn by turn. So one player executes a strategy and the other player follows. Both players have an idea as to what strategy would be available to the other, but they don't always know all the strategies that are available. So they might know what the player might start with, but as the game moves on, they will not know how the player will progress. And an example of this could be chess. Moving on to the last two kinds of differences would be normal form and extensive form. So the normal form you see extensively in Matrix. So the game theory matrix that we make for both the games, Viren, if you move down to the next slide, we will have matrix for both the games. So that's how a normal form looks. And an extensive form is on the first slide, which is basically like a tree. So it's usually the sequential form games which are shown in an extensive form, because you're able to see each step the game will progress. And a simultaneous game can be shown in the form of a matrix or in the form of an extensive form game, but that becomes a little advanced to discuss in this session. So that's the differences, and we can move on to the definitions of the two games that we have. Viren, you want to take over for the definition of Battle of the Sexes?
Very well said, Sanaa. Very detailed explanation there. Thank you. And as Sanaa said, right, we saw the tree in the first slide where it was a game that was sequential, so it depended on what the other player was doing. So you tend to best respond to the move made by the other player. We don't want to go too far into the intricacies of a best response strategy. We look at two simultaneous games now, right? And I like the phrasing or the titles for each of these games. I think it's pretty interesting. Battle of the Sexes and Chicken Game. Let me break down Battle of the Sexes for you before we look at before Sanaa looks at the Chicken Game. So in the Battle of the Sexes, and where this phrase Battle of the Sexes comes in from, you're looking at a couple perhaps making a plan for the weekend and what they'd like to do over the course of the weekend. So a couple argues over what they would like to do over the weekend. Both know that they want to spend the weekend together, but they cannot agree over what to do. So in this case, the man who is player A would prefer to play a game of basketball, whereas the woman would like to play badminton on a Saturday, for example. And this is a classical example of a coordination game analyzed in game theory for its applications in many fields, such as business management, military operations. When you look at a country's foreign policy with another country, you're making simultaneous moves and strategies to kind of appease the other party. So, and when it comes to things like your foreign policy, for example, you don't want to provoke another country or to trigger another country to make a negative response. So you're trying to find a common ground or a mid ground to make both parties appease. So in this case, if we properly look into it, and I will zoom in on this Battle of the Sexes game a bit so that you can see the payoffs. So in this case, player A, being the man, would like to go for basketball more than playing badminton because he gets the highest payoff from playing basketball. If you remember from our previous sessions, the first number here refers to the role player, who is player A, who is the man in this case. So he gets the highest payoff when they play basketball and when his partner, in this case player B, also plays basketball with them. Conversely, player B, his partner, would love it for both of them to play badminton, because if you look at that fourth box highlighted in green across the diagonal, she gets the highest payoff when they both play badminton because she gets 2 and the partner gets 1. As you can see from this payoff, why is it called the Battle of the Sexes? Because then it comes down to who convinces the other more and who is willing to take up a bit of a loss more. And it comes sheerly down to argumentation there, because player A would love it for both of them to play basketball. Player B would like it for both of them to play badminton. They wouldn't want to play different sports, so they would want to spend time together, so they want to play the same sport. So then it comes down to a real battle of the sexes to decide which party is more successful and gets a payoff of 2, while the other gets a payoff of 1. There are further branches where you look at things like probability, and probability comes into effect. So you change the payoffs of the 4 different options, but we'll not get into that. We just wanted to speak to you about where this phrase "battle of the sexes" comes in, and how it is an example of a coordination game that Sanaa discussed earlier. Sanaa, would you like to take on the chicken game?
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on to the chicken game, it's a funny name, but you must have seen examples of this game in movies, especially car racing movies, and this game is also called the hog dove game. And the principle of the game is that while each player prefers not to yield to the outcome where neither player yields is the worst possible one. So to simplify, if two drivers are driving towards each other, the highest payoff would be if they don't chicken out, which is to keep going straight. But of course, the worst payoff would be if they keep going straight and neither of them swerves and they collide head on. So in that case, it'll be a fatal accident. Now we have to see the four scenarios would be if they both head towards each other and neither of them swerve. The next scenario would be if player A or driver A swerves. Third scenario would be if driver B swerves, and the fourth scenario would be both of them chicken out and both of them swerve. So if both of them swerve, neither of them will be harmed and they'll be on their way. But if one swerves and the other doesn't, the one who swerves would be the chicken, while the other is the daring one. And if both of them don't swerve, that with the worst possible outcome, both of them would get into an accident and the payoff would be -10, as that can be seen in the diagonal green quadrant. Yeah, that's about it. So what we have to see, and this is a great example of a coordination game, because within that moment we have to decide, and a simultaneous game as well, because both players are simultaneously making a decision as to what course of action to take. Viren, if you want to add something onto it?
Perfect, Sanaa. And in short, the chicken game is a perfect example to speak about Nikita Mazepin in Formula One. I call him Nikita Mazepin because he's always swerving around the track. So to all our F1 fans watching us, make sure you don't end up swerving when it comes to the chicken game. And what is important, and I want to draw a comparison between the chicken game and the Battle of the Sexes. What's important to note before we wrap up is both these games are simultaneous games. So you don't know what the other player's strategy is going to be. So you're kind of weighing your options up whilst you go about making your decision. Whereas if we scroll up to the first slide that Sanaa has curated for us, this is an example where organization B will only act after organization A has made a decision. So you're talking about things like collusion here, where you know that the other party will get involved in a certain contract or not. And then it's up to the second party to kind of agree with colluding with this firm or to opt not to. So that would be an example of where this tree comes in. So those are sequential games where you don't have to make decisions at the same time. So there are two different ways of formatting these games depending on whether they are simultaneous or sequential. We wanted to keep this very short, and we wanted to focus this session on game theory because we've referred to it a lot in our previous sessions, but we wanted to end our section for now on game theory with this episode 3, and when we go on to episode 4 next week, we'll start covering other dimensions in Econ. Sanaa, thank you very much once again for curating these slides, and I hope you enjoyed presenting it to our viewers.
I absolutely did. I hope the viewers enjoyed it as well, and learned something as well.
Definitely. Thanks, guys, for joining us for this short session.
Right.
So 3 takeaways: chicken game, battle of the sexes, and coordination. We'll see you next week. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.